Laughing. Hi, welcome back to Work in Progress. I'm a Sante feaster.
And I'm Jeff Guarino.
And today we're going to be talking about Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving.
Which is...
Yeah, deep topic can be.
Yes.
Right?
If we're going past the discussion of food, then yes.
I suppose. Now, Thanksgiving is not an Icelandic
holiday, no.
Holiday, of course.
It's only, I would say it's only an American holiday. I don't know. Is it Canadian? Do they celebrate Thanksgiving in Canada?
I really wouldn't think so, but because it's a whole different thing.
They have a whole, the origination story may be different, right?
Exactly.
Especially in French-speaking Canada. Okay. No, so yeah, I want to discuss Thanksgiving because it's coming up again next week, as it does every year. But I think it's becoming more... I don't want to say demonized. It's becoming seen for more of what it actually is. It's not really a day of celebration of the establishment of the Pilgrims, as many people want us to believe.
Okay. Now, it's interesting because when I first came to Iceland, I don't even think they were selling turkeys.
I'm surprised.
In the fall. But turkey has become more recognized or common, I believe. And I think it's actually a nice idea in Iceland to have Thanksgiving because everybody gets together Christmas, but not, people have big families and sometimes it's better for people to do something earlier so everybody can join in. And I know in my family, it's become sort of like that thing, like everybody has their husband or wife's family that they go to. So they use Thanksgiving as a way to before that to get to,
see each other.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I feel my biggest thing was I don't think a lot of Icelandic people know what the whole point or the origination of Thanksgiving actually was. I think it's a very glamorized thing. When I had a Thanksgiving dinner a few years ago, and one of my Icelandic friends, I brought out the turkey, but I already cut it up because I was like, I didn't want it at the table. It's a messy thing to do. And he was like, why is it not whole at the table? And I said, oh, I just cut it and it's less messy. And he said, but in the movies, it's always, at the center of the table, this big turkey. Yeah. And I said, oh no, I don't feel like being bothered with that. And I think it's a Hollywood thing, like the Christmas turkey or the Thanksgiving turkey.
That's a very famous painter did a Rockwell. That's a Rockwell painting of the family around with the grandpa cutting turkey. As a cook, I very well of the kind of tradition of bringing the turkey out. It's presented and then you cut it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of part of the whole thing. In Iceland, though, I think I'm not sure why anybody would know. I think it's interesting for them to know. The holiday as it's come to be, I think, is a nice thing because it's a family thing. The origin of it, like most things, is usually glamorized and eased over.
Very PG.
And
what is the origin of Thanksgiving?
Sorry about that. The origin, speaking of family, the origin of Thanksgiving was the feast celebration of Indians helping pilgrims come to be or to adjust in
on their new land that they decided to share magically when they came here. Yeah, so I think that's something we should talk about.
Okay.
That things, like you said, Thanksgiving started when the Pilgrims came to the Americas, and essentially it's presented to you in school as they came to the Americas, and the Native Americans essentially welcomed them, helped them learn how to grow food and take care of themselves, and they had a feast, and that was Thanksgiving.
Yeah. Now the thing about it is, in many native cultures, and as they called them in that day, savage, which is very funny, but not. It's funny in a weird way. Why? That they call them savage because it was such a civilized thing that they welcomed them, being strangers, and a lot of cultures welcome the stranger.
So you mean ironic?
ironic. That's a better word. A lot of cultures, savage cultures, African cultures, welcome strangers, and sharing of food is, as I've talked with many different kinds of people from all over the world, seems to be the thing to do. And certainly for Native Americans, I think that was the impetus. They didn't have this idea of ownership. And so they were just fellow people of the land, you know. There's a universality with a lot of the savage cultures about we don't own this land. You know, we are caretakers of the land. And so with that mindset, of course, they would welcome, you know, strangers and share what they had. Without the Native Americans' help, the colonists who were not used to that environment, for sure, or the landscape, probably wouldn't have survived, not knowing the native vegetation and stuff. So the celebration was right before the winter, you know, kind of a big feast going into that winter thing, which I think Icelanders can I agree with, considering what's the preserved food celebration, the Thorblot, that happens.
Wrong person. Sorry.
Okay.
Don't
you
know
know,
about
well,
that.
most Icelanders understand the pickled sheep's and sheep's head and salted fish.
All the preserved foods.
Yeah.
But I think we also have to mention that that's not exactly what happened, as there was a lot of murdering for that to take place.
Yeah.
We can't omit that. And that's why something like Thanksgiving and Columbus Day, these are days of mourning for many indigenous communities in the Americas, because this is historically where a lot of their ancestors were savagely murdered by these civilized people.
Now we're bringing up this dynamic now. You know, people will argue this. I'm going to play the devil's advocate. So why now?
Why now what?
Why is that important now that are we destroying Thanksgiving now? See, this is, I watch too much Fox News and they tend to do that. So what are we going to teach our kids? That their ancestors were murderers?
So is this what you're asking me?
Well, you know, since we're bringing up the subject of the realness of Thanksgiving.
Well, I don't think this is a why now problem. Indigenous people have always been talking about it. I think in the day and age where we have technology and social media, their opinions are able to leave their community and spread out to other people. So it's not a matter of why now. It's always been talked about. But Indigenous voices are being silenced, and we need to listen to them.
You know, this is the thing about the internet and culture today that I certainly didn't grow up with, being a person of my generation. And I think this is for many in my generation. I don't think younger generations really get so turned out or turned up or, you know, crazy about bringing these subjects or educating themselves. But my generation, you know, we grew up with things being in a certain box. And now it seems like everything is controversial to some people. I mean, I love knowledge. I love learning things. But a lot of people are so comfortable. And I think when we bring up these topics, it will tend to make some people uncomfortable. And to that, I would say, how would we, if we were talking about this issue, broach it? Because sometimes I think it feels like an attack. Like, oh, you didn't know that? Well, then you need to be canceled. You know, it's like, you know.
So
what I mean?
I think there's a difference between not knowing and being, you want to continue to be ignorant. And like you said, some people want to stay in that box. I think when you are always comfortable, you do not grow. Growth is uncomfortable.
Good point.
And you have to be uncomfortable to learn some new things. That does not mean that you are essentially, you're wrong. You don't, you know, when you know better, you do better. So when you know that something is insensitive to some people, for example, the way I thought about it was, the Tulsa massacre that happened, and, you know, things like Black Wall Street. If there was a celebration on that day when something that was very devastating for Black people, and there was food and everything, I would feel like, no, I would feel upset.
Yeah.
And that's something these are things that are also being spoken about more. And thank goodness for social media, now that we can hear these Indigenous people say, we don't like these things. We never liked them. Now that we have social media, we can put our own voices out there in our own way. And either we as people can listen to them and take those things in our stride, or we can ignore them and say, well, I enjoy this holiday and what it stands for, as opposed to acknowledging that these people are in pain. And this is something that will continue to be, I think this is something that's generational, not just for Indigenous communities, but for other people. Thanksgiving is a holiday that many people remember for generations to come. So I think moving forward, how do you make this something that can open the eyes of, the generations back and the generations going forward?
You see, I think, and I'm of the opinion that it's important to know these things because they do have an effect on how we understand what's happening today and how we understand people, how we avoid getting triggered, I guess. I don't know. Because there's so much of that backlash that's happened around when you bring up subjects that people normally haven't listened to or haven't been aware of. And certainly living in Iceland, I've seen many protests happen in Iceland about things that weren't happening in Iceland, war and things of this nature. And I'm always curious as living in Iceland and talking and being amongst Icelanders. It just brings back when we did our Black Lives Matter thing, and the question was, why should we care? And I think we are all, in a way, citizens of the world, and to be a citizen of the world and to be a responsible citizen of the world, you got to have some knowledge or be at least curious. And I think there's a distinct lack of curiosity here, and major growing so in the United States as well. And I think that lack of curiosity, coupled with the social media dynamic where what I say is important. It's so important that I need to correct you right now. Okay. I'm going to tweet this right now. It kind of gets people on the wrong side of an issue. You know what I mean?
Okay.
And so I think I think for me, my understanding and my perception of it is to avoid these arguments and things, and to have a better understanding. So I mean, that's where
Why do you want to avoid arguments?
Well, people, there are some people who really just don't want to bring up, like, for instance, Black Lives Matter, all lives matter. It's just, I don't want to get into that.
There's always going to be
critical race theory, which isn't taught in the schools. It isn't taught in the schools. However, you're trying to make me feel bad about history. I don't want to feel bad about history. I don't even want to think about it. Okay, that was in the past. I just want, and I think some of that has to do with our economic systems. I think people are tired. I think people work a lot. There's less time for these things. Who sits down and reads a newspaper anymore? Who is that? Who has that intellectual curiosity? Most people are just trying to live, pay their bills, and work. And I think so by design, the way we have gone economically as well as socially has led us into a very dumbing down, narrowing, limited capacity for these topics. And I believe these topics are crucial and important. And I think we're seeing a change within society altogether.
So then you should want people to argue about this, because I think if you want to argue about something, even if you want to argue the contrary, you're going to do some reading about it, aren't you? You can definitely argue from the dumbed down perspective. It happens.
But you see what I mean? And it's not like I don't think people are evil. I think people are asleep. Which is where the whole term woke comes up. And I hate that term in a way because it's been used too much or whatever. But they're asleep because they've been put to sleep. We look at our news media. Our news media is all like, it's packaged from where the government wants us to be at a certain time. which is why you get a Donald Trump, because before Donald Trump, everything was equal. It's
Allegedly.
like if you say this is white and I say this is black, the news person comes and says, well, we don't know. Both people have a point. He says it's white. She says it's black. We just cannot. And it's like you can see it for yourself. But you see what I'm saying? So nobody really knows the truth anymore. Truth has become relative. Truth has literally become relative. Like what your truth is doesn't necessarily be my truth. And so when we bring up Thanksgiving and it's the dark past of it and what it means for Native Americans and why we may not want to celebrate Christopher Columbus, or we may want to look at that. Should we be celebrating that? I think that speaks to us as people. Like, what do we value? And if we value those kind of things, whether it's Christopher Columbus or honoring Native Americans, our direction is kind of being written for us.
Okay, so I want to know, how is our direction being written for us? So let's say you support Christopher Columbus and all he stood for, allegedly. How would you go about supporting that on Columbus Day?
Well, I couldn't, because I know too much about Christopher Columbus, so I wouldn't. But I understand. I always try to look at things from another perspective, and I always try to reason and understand why people are, coming. Because I don't think people inherently are just evil. I think they can do evil things, but I think a lot of that is guided and asleep. And I get that from like. You ever have somebody like go off and you yell at you or something and then come back at you and say, oh, I'm sorry, this was going on in my life and blah, 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 blah. And I really believe that. But at the moment that they're going off on you, that's their world at that moment. They're not themselves. They're asleep. The whole point about woke and the whole meaning of that is to come out of that sleep. Be the person that you want to be in the world. Or be the change that you want to be in the world. As corny as that sounds, it is actually the truth. And so, like, again, bringing back to the subject of Thanksgiving, I have Native American family members. And my father's mother, Cherokee Indian. But I didn't know a lot of that history. Because my parents, not to get too personal or deep, but my parents were separated, so I didn't get a chance to get into that side of my family's, my father's family.
Okay.
However, I have talked with Native American members of my family and other people who are Native American. I've been to the Pequot Museum in the States, and that's a whole nother issue. I've read about the schools in the States and the things that were done to Native American children. The
residential schools?
Yes. This history it's curious that this is not taught, and because it's such an ugly history, right? But if you don't know history, then what is the saying?
It repeats itself. So ugly history is not taught. We can agree on that. But also, as they say, the victors write the history books because we have Columbus Day and we have Thanksgiving. Even though Thanksgiving, as we are being told by Indigenous people, is a day that is it's a mourning day for them. Many of the ancestors were killed for the betterment and establishment of the colonial Americas.
So are you saying we should not celebrate Thanksgiving?
Am I saying that?
Would you say that?
For myself, I can say that for myself.
Okay.
I don't tell people what to do. I give them information, and I think they should make their own moves based on that. I think if you want to celebrate Thanksgiving for whatever reason, for most people, Thanksgiving is not about, as I can say as a Black American, Thanksgiving was fuck Columbus and the settlement of the Americas. It was about the food. Yeah. This is the time when everyone got to come home from school or college, and we ate and just got to see each other. It was almost like an earlier Christmas.
So why can't we just keep it like that? Why do we have to discuss the massacre?
I think we need to discuss the massacre because, like you said, when you don't know your history, it repeats itself. We have in the indigenous communities, there are, first of all, missing and murdered indigenous women. They are going missing at a much higher rate than any other group of women in the Americas. Mm-hmm. And it's not being publicized. It's not on the media. Mm-hmm. And when they do get reported, these murders and these kidnappings or women get reported mm-hmm. missing, they're brushed off by the police because of the addiction problems in the community, because the sex work that's happening in the community. Mm-hmm. So these things are being brushed off or just swept under the rug, of course, because these communities are seen as problems in a part of the colonial society that they're in.
Now, that brings me back to why would we care in Iceland about mm-hmm. that?
You know what? What I found so interesting.
And not to mean that we don't mm-hmm. or that people don't, but to what benefit? Because most people do things for the benefit of some mm-hmm. reason for themselves.
So my question is, right, I've been to, it was at Hackhook that I saw this, and apparently they also have it at one of the local party stores. Mm-hmm. I'll put it like that. They have kids' costumes for them to dress up as a native chief. So when I saw this and it has, a headband with some tacky, colorful feathers, I said, what do you know about being a native chief? Mm-hmm. To me, my question is, what is the benefit of knowing that? Mm-hmm. What is the benefit of your 4-year-old walking around making some noises and swinging a fake axe? Mm-hmm. How is that? Well, I want to know, where did they learn this native behavior? So if we can start there, to me, if you can know how to act native by dressing up like this mm-hmm. and wanting to be an Indian, mm-hmm. you should know that these people were slaughtered and their land was taken and they were displaced. Mm-hmm. I feel you can't have one without the other, personally speaking. And this is something that is historical that needs to be learned. It doesn't matter if it's the good part of history or the ugly side of history. Mm-hmm. Because if you want to go out into the world and be a better person, I think you need to know about Native Americans and the issues that they're having in their communities, especially if you go to the Americas where they live on reservations. And to you, that may be a bit weird. Like, why are these people living just in this certain area and they have these government IDs that are set in place by the same people that colonized them? Like, it's ass backwards.
Well, the misunderstanding of peoples in general mm-hmm. and issues that arise, or how we've been seeing arise, especially in the last 10, 15 years, come to the fore, like, transgender rights mm-hmm. or LGBTQ community, these kind of things. The history of this is not known mm-hmm. of peoples, mm-hmm. even women. I remember Hidden Figures when that movie came out, mm-hmm. how mad I was because I didn't realize that there were Black women, African-American women mm-hmm. who were part mm-hmm. of the space program, mm-hmm. which was like, when I grew up, the space program, as a little kid, you're like, oh, wow, that's great, blah, blah, blah. But there were people who looked like me mm-hmm. or members of my family who contributed to that. Mm-hmm. Contributions of women, white, Black, Native American, Spanish. I mean, never hear about that. Mm-hmm. Never hear about those stories. And in World War II, which is one of my favorite historical subjects, hearing about the teenager, I can't remember because it's so fresh, a German teenager who resisted what was going on in Germany and got a group of her friends to resist all these programming and governmental things mm-hmm. that were going on. Never hear about this stuff. And if you don't hear about those things, you kind of think, well, why did all the Germans agree with this? Well, all mm-hmm. the Germans didn't agree with what mm-hmm. was going on. And just like in the United States, when slavery was going on, not every white person agreed with what was mm-hmm. going on with slavery. And if we don't know that, we generalize mm-hmm. and then we misunderstand. And that leads to other division. And sometimes that turns deadly. And I think that's what I've been seeing as of late with our news and with these subjects that come up that people don't, Black Lives Matter, all lives matter. It's like you're missing the whole point. And because of that lack of education and historical knowledge, I get why you're saying that it's important. And I think wherever you are in the world, including being here in Iceland, that this is something that, as a person who doesn't just stay in Iceland, we travel. What's one of the reasons we travel? To learn, maybe to experience new things. And I think a lot of people, some people, selfishly go through the world not wanting to know. Spend their whole lives not wanting to know.
They want to be in that box.
And eventually will be.
That's true.
As we all.
And like you said, that's the point. If we don't learn these histories and see how they're in a way, and of course there's generational trauma that goes from the slaughter of the establishment of Thanksgiving to residential schools to now. These are systematic problems that this colonial system wants to happen. A lot of people, I've heard people say they thought all indigenous communities, they were dead because of how they're portrayed. They like, oh, all these like little Indian people were killed, and yeah, that sucks, but we get to dress up like an Indian chief for Halloween, or I'm a Cherokee princess. And no, these people still exist. They have lives. They contribute to society, and they have voices.
It's as you're speaking, it's just bringing up things that I've learned throughout history, like the Navajo code breakers in World War II, who had their language was what prevented Nazis from breaking our codes, our secret codes. Basically, won our war in the South Pacific.
So this is a part of our history.
It's a part of our history,
need to know.
And it's like, so every group has contributed in this world something. As an African American, the feeling I get a lot of times is, you guys don't do anything. You haven't done anything.
Ever since we started working for free.
And it's it's just the way one responds that gives me that impression. And it's like there's not knowledge to back that up. There's been kind of ever since I think slavery, I think there's been a sort of financial benefit for ignorance. There's been a definite, significant financial boost to keeping the masses ignorant. And with the internet, that kind of democratizes information. So it's not just, you can read almost any book ever written. Whereas before you go to university or something. That doesn't mean that any average Joe can be a scholar. It just means you do have access to the information. It's not held to an elite. But I think that is kind of where we see now this split. We have my kids are curious and they listen to the things that I say. They listen to because they have all this information, and sometimes you can get flooded with it, but they understand the importance of it to then be that educated person, not that ignorant person, to respond to questions or challenges or figure out who they actually are. So tell me, how did you get to that transition where Thanksgiving changed in your mind for you? Was there an experience?
It was always like
happened?
that. No, my mom growing up, we weren't allowed to. So of course, when you go to school, you have, what they teach you about the Native Americans and the settlement and all these dates and how the Americas was established. Growing up for my mom, I remember we had a discussion about something about Thanksgiving, and she said, I don't think it should be celebrated because it's not a celebration, it's a day of murder. And so I was very young. So ever since then, that was my establishment of Thanksgiving. So I didn't have this thing of, oh no, we traded corn and we were all really happy. No one got murdered. My mom was like, no, absolutely not. She didn't want this this idea in our head that this was something that should be celebrated and America is this lovey-dovey place, because it wasn't true. So for me, it was always this way. And we didn't do like much, you know. We sometimes would cook. That was the extent of Thanksgiving. We weren't happy to be in America. My family was here by force because I am descended from slaves. So you're welcome.
Well, you know, as an African American, you know, we are not a monolith. And we all we don't all think the same.
Yeah.
It's really interesting that's kind of put on us. It's easy to point us out in the crowd, but we don't all think the same. Just like no white person or Caucasian person thinks the same. And like you see an Icelandic person, you know, if I were to see an Icelandic person, I can't tell one from an Irish or an Italian or whatever. But to throw them all together and then say, oh, they all think alike is kind of a ridiculous notion. But it's done to other groups of people, done to Asian Americans, Native Americans. There's a lot of different Native American nations. And you know, when you point that ignorance out to people, it triggers, sometimes it triggers that you're attacking my identity. You know, it's important, I think, for people to define their own identity in a way, because you know, it's like a good friend of mine is Republican, and Donald Trump Republican.
Be careful,
yeah, and we do discuss, because he doesn't shut down me speaking, and because of that, I don't shut him down speaking. So when we do discuss things, it has to be based on pure factual things. And what I found is, although there's probably a good 10% hardcore that we will never agree on, when we discuss things, it's similar. We're like on the same path. A lot of what happens is there's other influences that push and pull, but you got to know your identity. You got to know who you are. And like the identity of what you take yourself to be usually isn't who you really are. It's what you've taken yourself to be. I know this is maybe getting a little deep, but I think it's the key to one being open to understanding like what we're talking about. Like when you bring this subject up. For Thanksgiving, for me, was all about food and getting together. And the naive story of the Native Americans welcoming the Pilgrims in, I thought was such a nice, lovely story. And it's partly true. Because they did welcomed Leif Erikson in Americas, and they traded. And that's the other thing. I didn't even know that happened before Christopher Columbus even stepped foot. So I mean,
why did we not know that, Jeffrey?
The American education system is like, they treat the American people like children. And not
only that, we're led to believe that basically nothing happened, nothing existed. The pinnacle of this country's existence started when the white man came here and did what they did. Nothing predates that. So you see what I mean? Like you said, you didn't know that.
But if I grew up, okay, so we continue on that line of thought. If I grew up and that was my only reference, then I feel pretty great. If I were white, right, and that's my only reference, well, yeah, we did everything. Okay, we built the country. If it wasn't for us, okay, you guys would be in mud huts. I've heard that before, by the way. You'd be in mud huts, okay? Not understanding or not even knowing
my best life.
Not even knowing where all these other inventions and creations came from within the world.
That a lot of Black people made, mind you.
Asian Americans, I mean,
Latinos,
even Muslim nations, out of Muslim nations, the history in Iraq and Iran, like the only thing most people know about those places, terrorists. And it's like, why do you say that? Because that's what they told me. And these are the same people who are like, I'm not a sheep. It's like, you kind of act like one.
When much of your identity and your culture is based on the suppression of other people, wanting to celebrate those people does seem like an attack on everything you know.
It's your identity. It's like when there was discussion of whether we should have Columbus Day in the United And if Italian Americans, which my stepfather is Italian American, a lot of Italian Americans are like, that was a source of pride.
Columbus Day?
Columbus.
Columbus not even Italian.
This is the story. Okay. Source of pride, because they have a Italian American club in my hometown. It's on the Italian American, some kind of like hall that they have, and Christopher Columbus is there. We won't, but that's what they know. So when they were, maybe we shouldn't, take down the statue or whatnot, Italian Americans came out because now you're attacking Italian American. Okay. And when I started learning and reading about the history of Christopher Columbus, I didn't even understand why we celebrated him. Like, he didn't even hit.
It's so suspicious that we're celebrating this man.
He didn't even hit America. So it's like, as individuals, we have to be our own. I mean, we have the technology now to be our own historians. We can learn and look up these things. But again, like I said, I think a lot of this ties into how we've grown as a civilization. And I love history, like I said, and one of the key things that sticks out in my mind was when JFK, Eisenhower was welcoming JFK into the White House. And he was talking about how the United States has gone from a farm kind of based economy to kind of a military industrial complex, which is where that comes from, his speech. And he said it affects us spiritually and as a people. And he also said we must guard against the undue influences, whether sought or unsought, from the industrial military complex. Blows my mind. I never knew he made that speech. We learned about the presidents in history. I didn't know he made that speech. Neither did I know John F. Kennedy made a speech about secret societies before he was assassinated. It's a deep hole. And I think what we're seeing is a literal dumbing down of America. So we have some people who are curious and wanting to know, and we have a resistance of people who, for whatever reason, don't want to know. My thing is, when we bring issues like this, how is it that we present it in a way so people understand the importance of not being led by what you've been told? Now, and just to tack that on, I also very religious at a point in my life, and in a way still am. But I remember one passage in the Bible that says, study for yourself to show yourself approved. Study for yourself. That always stuck out in my mind because I was raised Roman Catholic. And you went to church to learn anything about the Bible. And you had a father and a pope, and they told you. And the Bible itself says, study for yourself. Like, in other words, you're responsible for your own knowledge, which I thought was critical. So how do you understand that? Would you agree that we have these two kind of divergent courses in our public spaces, where we have people who are open to learning and we have a resistance to that learning?
I think I would say it's not a resistance. They don't want people to stray from what we already know. For example, this is how we always done it. Why do you want to do it differently? This way is working. Why do you? That's the question. Yeah, it's this way is working. Everything is fine. Why do you want to stray? I'm sure this is how many white people felt when protests for desegregation were happening. Everything is fine. You people have your things. We have our things. Leave it alone. This is fine. Why do you want to change that?
Yeah.
I'm sure this is, the mentality of a lot of people. And I think that's a mentality that's not completely unknown to humans. Everything is good. Everything is safe in my box. We know how everything works. Why do you want to step out of the box?
Do you think, because, when we talk of races, which can I stress this again? There is no race. We're all of the human race. And that changes the way we think about it. Race is a human
construct.
Okay, yes. So I think that's changed the way we think about things. So when we always bring up black, white, or things like this, and really, it's not it's disingenuous, and I don't think it's fair, because we're like, again, all black people aren't a monolith. All white people are not a monolith. All Icelandic people certainly are not a monolith. Just look at the political system. There's like 7 different parties. So, we present it, but I think we also have to be careful of just, this is what they think. This is what they think. I think, though, for what I see, generally, there are just 2 different things coming up in our society, and that is this one woke, for lack of a better term, movement, and then there's kind of a resistance to that.
But there are people of all colors in both of those groups. This is not a black versus white or a Indigenous American versus Latino thing. There are white people that are woke and white people that are resistant. And I think that needs to become part of the larger conversation. There is no, like you said, there's no monolith to anything. So being woke does not mean you're black and you're ready to ride or die at any moment. Because there are some black people that are like, well, maybe he shouldn't have looked so aggressive. And, as black people, we're like, fuck, like this is crazy. And how can you say this kind of thing? Like, you're also a black person. Haven't you been mistreated before? Well, yeah, but I was doing something stupid, or no, that's never happened to me. And I live in these really,
now I'm going to push in that, because I think having a little bit of, not so assuredness about oneself or one's actions is kind of a good thing, because there have been many times that I've been assured that I was right on something where I was totally wrong, and it's not even like something big. I could just, like, you're in a car and somebody cuts you off or something, and it was because she was dealing with her son who just jumped from the back seat into the front seat. It wasn't that she meant to cut you off. You know what I mean? It's like, we cannot be omniscient in knowing the motivations or what's going on in someone's mind. And
you don't have to know what's going on in someone's mind to be like racially, like,
true.
This is the thing I kind of mean. I don't mean people doing I mean like people getting murdered. I've never murdered somebody on accident. And I know if I did murder somebody by accident, I'd be in jail. And, speaking of recent events, since a young man just got away with murder in America, I don't know if I'm allowed to say his name, so I'm going to just shut up. That's not something that I know as a black woman, and I know you for certain as a black man would not get away with.
I don't
even think you would have made it to the courthouse, Jeffrey.
No, I don't think I could have walked down the street with an AR-15 past police and they would have waved me by. No.
See what I'm talking about?
That wouldn't have happened.
See what I'm talking about?
Yeah, and it's things like that.
And there's people of all colors that are outraged by this. So it's not, I'm not saying just black people are angry. Like, everyone is angry about this. That is in their right mind.
We're not going to bring up that case, but it
does. It's too late.
The name, I'm sorry.
I won't say the name.
But that does present a great example of some of this understanding and knowledge of what we're talking about. Past historical wrongs and what that means today, and why people feel the way they feel about that case and other cases today. If you know the history, then you're like, oh, I get it. When the Black Panthers, who under the Second Amendment had a right to carry arms, went to
and did just that.
Went to the Capitol in California, instantly the laws changed. Well, maybe we shouldn't have the right to carry the guns, It's very interesting. And here's my bottom line is this. I hold anyone to what you believe. So in the United States, all men are created equal, endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. The right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Noble, great words. Do you mean it, or are you full of?
Well, as we know that those terms and conditions got updated every now and then, because at first we were 3/4 of a man. I certainly was never going to be close to being a man. I mean, nowadays I'm almost as equal as a man. So you got to give them that. Terms and conditions often were updated, after lots of murder wars, disowning
but like
slaves.
Like we were saying about that particular case, why are people outraged? Well, you have a young white kid who, and you just have to look at a group of people who would be able to carry a military-looking style gun up to police, and the police not stop, question, or be concerned in any way.
And but not only, also, mind you, when he was doing this, the police knew there were protests going on, so it wasn't as if
there was a shooting. They were responding.
So there's that, but they also knew what kind of environment this was. He was not walking through the suburbs with a gun and just randomly walked up to a house and shot 2 people. They knew there were protests going on, and they knew there was some racial outrage, and they see a young white man with a gun. So of course, this also speaks to the perception of the police system.
Systematic racism. So we go back into tying it into Thanksgiving and our Native American brothers and sisters. Now, our Native American brothers and sisters who helped the European settlers establish themselves were then demonized, literally, as savages, as to be feared. Which, when you think about it, it just blows my mind.
And then they made Pocahontas, and they made us like it. Disney did a number on my mental health.
Yeah. Disney. Well, look at who it came from. But anyway, our Native American brothers and sisters, they see this particular recent case. White kid, guns down people, walks away. I don't know how you process that without understanding vast systematic inequalities, crazy ideas of perception versus actual threat.
Well, I think indigenous people are there. I would say not. I know they're already dealing with this, with indigenous women being murdered, and I should say another indigenous man. It happens a lot, but he was also murdered. He was going onto someone's property to ask. His car broke down, and they shot and killed him. So, I think these are things. And,
but something like that. I'm sorry to interrupt, but something like that. It always makes me wonder. The person who picks up the gun to shoot and kill someone who they don't know and who's of a different ethnic background. What informed them to think that would be okay? And the reason I think a lot of especially white people who are majority, let's just say the majority, which would be white in the United States, don't understand. No, I lost my thought. Don't understand that our reaction is because the man goes innocently to a door looking for help, not to harm.
He didn't even make it to the door.
The other person's perception or maybe experience has only been negative. So they don't see another person coming. They see a threat. And this is how I think a lot of police, when you have engagements between white and black and police, you have a perception that informs a thought that will in turn have an action. This is the whole premise for me, the whole basis for me, and the whole protest with the George Floyd and everything, why that's important. Nobody wants to die over someone's imagination. And, this is where that historical knowledge comes into place, comes into being, and why it's relevant for anyone, wherever you are in the world, to get to know the people who are in that world. Native Americans have been relegated further and further out from, pushed off the land, pushed, and made treaties with, and then broken and made treaties with. And that's all good faith. Like if me and you agree, and then you go back on the terms and just push, now to the point where most people don't even know they're alive. It's a crime against us. It's just a crime against just us. Our whole life experience is a variety. And if we don't understand that and see that, when we're missing a whole lot, and I think in this consumerist type system we have, we're missing a lot of this. We're like the whole meaning of life, and you totally miss it when you're bottling it down to this is what I want to, this prepackaged box is what I want to experience in life. You have squandered what little time and breadth of experience life is. When I walk through my day in Iceland, I am so overjoyed when I get to talk to an Icelandic person, or Icelandic person shows interest. Where I work, I'm able to come across some of older Icelandic citizens and their stories and the things they have experienced and the way they look at the world. It helped me establish myself here in a way and appreciate it, because they sat and talked with me. They told me about their life. They told me about their experience, something totally foreign to me. So now when I see an Icelandic person, all that knowledge that I've acquired comes to mind as well. Younger Icelandic generations is a different thing, and you talk to them and they have all different experiences to how they see things, and that's kind of a really cool, interesting way to look at things too. But the importance of that, I realized when I moved that I was always thinking the wrong thing, but I didn't have no knowledge to work with.
Thinking the wrong thing of what?
Of people or their motivations, of why things were done the way they were. I had no reference in which to formulate an educated opinion. And so what and I tie that into, like, when we bring up these discussions about these topics, how important it is, because it changes you in a way to be more accepting and more willing to grow, like you were saying.
And I would like to say, I think the biggest receivers of injustice when it comes to the erasure of Indigenous communities and experiences is the Indigenous community themselves. I think we all definitely lose something, but that needs to be said. And like you said, I do think something's being taken from us. And I think what's being given in exchange is ignorance. They want you to think Native people are dead and they're gone. They're pushed away on reservations. They were being abused. We know when you have abuse and trauma, you can fall into addiction. And many of them have addiction issues within their communities. And it's written off as the drunk Indian.
And you know what? That ties into us as a human experience that, like you said, all these traumas and things, they have consequences and reactions. And as human beings, we all come to addiction. We see that in poor communities, whether white or black. Same kind of things, outcomes happen. So it's very important, very important. So I think we touched on the importance of understanding the history of all kind of festivals or events.
And I would also like you said, what makes them want to go to someone and shoot them when they see them coming on their property? Like you said, I think it's history, which is why this recent case of this young man once again getting away with murder it's another historical moment. So when the next time it happens, and we've seen it before, we've heard it before, white people are like, I'm gonna do what I want to do and I'm gonna get away with it, and then it happens. And they get away with these things and we're outraged and we go, what makes you think you can do that? Well, if I was a young white man, I'd be like, I can do what the fuck I want. I'm not gonna go to jail. If I was, especially when you have money. These, of course, I don't
think that particularly.
Not just not that that's the only circumstance, but when you're white, you automatically know. You're like, I have a little bit of more leeway to do things.
Well, there was. I mean, perfect example was the one white woman who stormed the Capitol and said, "I'm not going to jail because I'm blonde and I'm white," and the judge sent her to jail. So I mean,
that's true.
Yeah,
but she also deserved jail, just like this young man deserved jail.
the law, I will push back on that a little bit, because the law was actually on his side, the way it was written. The law for self-defense in that particular state was so broad that he was actually legally.
And he killed he killed 2 white people. So
yeah,
we thought he was definitely going to jail.
Yeah. No, the gun laws are a whole other topic in and of themselves in the United States.
So I want to see if that would be possible in that same state with a black person killing another black person.
The perception is that this young,
because as they say, that was white on white crime.
Yeah. Well, what about black on black?
Why don't we ever talk about white on white crime, Jeffrey? That was white on white crime.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, you kill who's close to you. But anyway, it's you're right. Again, we have all these touchstones in history, statues, holidays that I think are good to be looked at and questioned. And it was an English news report that I was seeing that was talking about their statues and things. And some of those guys were tied with the slave trade. And he said, what do we want to promote in the society? And the things that we celebrate and the statues we put up are the things we celebrate and value, which is the reason they tore down a lot of these slave owner statues. That's not what they want their society to be about.
So I think a lot of this is about what we want our society to be about going forward and to look like going forward. I think, like you said, we need to have these discussions, even if you are in Iceland. I don't think your children should be dressing up as a Native Indian chief. If you think all Native people are dead, I think that's very strange. That would be like your child dressing up as, I think, like, I'm not trying to be facetious, but Catholics get offended when you dress up as a nun or the Pope, or if your kid dressed up as God and someone was like, oh, this is very upsetting. Oh, it's Halloween and their children. And they would, no, I'm going to stand by this. I think we have to put into perspective not only what is happening in our society now, but what we have to learn from the past.
All right. I think it's a great way to end it. And then I think we touched on the things we need to. Hopefully we bring up some other people who may have a different opinion or a different way of viewing these topics, especially here.
So thank you for watching our show, Work in Progress. Have a good night.